The United States Supreme Court has just given Donald Trump and the Trump administration, particularly his immigration czar, Stephen Miller, that racist, a significant win on immigration. Now the government can deport migrants to so-called third world countries without giving them a heads up, a chance to call a lawyer, or provide an explanation as to why going back to the countries they are from could be dangerous. We're talking about people from places like Myanmar, Cuba, and Vietnam. Some were almost sent to South Sudan. In fact, they were back in court today, the Supreme Court, to get a clarification on the ruling yesterday, which was a short, unsigned order. These folks, 8 of them, were almost sent to South Sudan, a country they've never even stepped foot in. Trump's strict deportation policy is back, at least for now. We'll be talking, hopefully in a moment, with our good brother, Elie Mystal, who is justice correspondent for The Nation. And while we're teeing that up, as I said, the order, which we'll talk about in a minute, he'll walk us through that and some of the activity that's taking place today. We're going to go straight to our regular Tuesday night quorum of folk, all trusted, reliable voices. Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, former senior advisor for environmental justice at the Environmental Protection Agency, and here in Washington, D.C. Our good brother Larry Walker, Dr. Larry Walker, associate professor, University of Central Florida, Orlando, Florida. Brother Walker, that associate, I smell some tenure and promotion, brother. Congratulations, if I haven't told you before. And I think there's some tenure and promotion in the air. And we all 3 of us, all 4 of us know what that is. And of course, rounding out the Tuesday night panel, our good sister, Dr. Niambi Carter, author, associate professor at School of Public Policy, University of Maryland, one-time professor, colleague at Howard University here in Washington, D.C. In fact, Niambi, let's start with you, sis. This court is wilding. What do you make of the recent, now the Supreme Court overturning the lower courts there, the Boston judge that said, wait a minute, you can't just send people out the country without hearing nothing. What do you make of this latest development?
Well, I mean, I think, the Supreme Court is intent on giving Donald Trump whatever he wants. I mean, South Sudan is not the safest country for residents. So the fact that you would send people who are not citizens, who know nothing of this country, and with no real mechanism or institutional context to keep them safe, bring them back into anything, it feels like the Supreme Court is just intent on helping Donald Trump break all kinds of international law. So I don't know what to make of this other than the Supreme Court is just as flat as the president.
Indeed, indeed. In fact, I'm glad actually, Doc, that you said that, because we've got our brother who I'm sure has just finished a hit somewhere else. He's everywhere at once these days. He's ubiquitous. And that's our friend and brother, Professor Elie Mystal with The Nation magazine. Elie, you there, brother?
Can you hear me?
I think he's there. Oh, there he is. Okay, we got your thumb up. Okay, good to see you, man. Hey, Dr. Carter just teed it up for us. We're trying to make sense of this latest ruling. We saw the dissent, of course. Sonia Sotomayor is not playing on that bench, and neither is Ketanji Onyeka Brown-Jackson in these moments. But could you walk us through where we are right now? There's been some activity at the court today. In fact, since this story broke yesterday, give us a sense of your interpretation of this ruling and where it fits in the longer arc of what this administration seems to be trying to do to immigrants.
Right. So the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that this court allowed Trump to violate an international human rights law, an international human rights treaty that this country has been a party to for over 3 decades. Okay, the treaty is called the Prevent Can't Send People to Terrorist Countries. I'm forgetting the name of the actual of treaty, but what it says is that you cannot send people to a third-party state without first ascertaining whether or not that state commits torture, tortures prisoners, violates various human rights. That's again, 30-year-old treaty in this country. Trump is doing that. He is sending people to third-party states that violate that international treaty, and the court said that that's just fine for now. What they did legally was that they lifted a lower court injunction that was meant to block Trump from sending immigrants away in this fashion, and they lifted that while saying that sometime later, sometime in the future, they might decide on whether or not Trump's actions are legal. So, 2-3 years, there's a good chance that at least two of the Republicans will come around and be like, actually, we shouldn't send people to countries where they're going to get tortured. But in the meantime, Trump can send people to countries where people are going to get tortured because they lifted the lower court injunction on what he's doing. And this is what the Supreme Court has been doing all throughout the Trump administration. As many of the viewers of this program knows, Trump gets defeated all of the time in lower courts. He gets defeated in front of Republican judges and Democrat judges. He gets defeated in front of Obama judges and Biden judges and Reagan judges and Bush judges, and even sometimes Trump judges. Trump gets defeated, loses in the lower courts like the Jets lose football games. All right? But the Supreme Court comes in after the fact and basically reverses those losses, lifts injunctions, lifts the things that were meant to stop Trump, and doesn't agree with what he's saying. But they say, like, oh, we'll just decide that later. And in the meantime, Trump gets to have his policies and continue his terror campaign against immigrants.
Let's go down that road a little bit, Ellie. Like you said, they continue to lose at lower courts, and of course, you've probably already talked about this. The whistleblower that over the Department of Justice is saying that Emil Bove was out talking bad in these email streets, talking about we just ignore the law, just defy the law and see what happens to us. But could you spend a minute helping us understand the importance of dissents in these cases? We know it's a shadow docket. They get there fast. It gets to the court, a quick, 1 or 2 sentences, but the dissenters, in this case, Justice Sotomayor, of course, joined by Kagan and Ketanji and Yuka Brown Jackson, wrote a fairly lengthy dissent. Why is that important? And what's the difference in terms of how she's interpreting the law and how they are interpreting the law between that and the majority?
Well, first of all, Sotomayor and Jackson, they're interpreting the law. The majority is not. Like the liberals are interpreting the law. The Republicans are trying to figure out how to allow Trump to get away with it. That is the key kind of intellectual difference between the two sides. That's the difference in their project. The Supreme Court on the Republican side, there are times where they're not even pretending to interpret the law. They're not even keeping up the appearances of having a real legal foundation for what they're doing. They're just kind of saying, well, Trump's the president and what can we do? Well, a lot. And that's gets to your question. That's what the dissents are doing. They're saying there's a lot that we could be doing. There are various ways that we could be stopping him. There are various legal codes and ethics and statutes and precedents that we could be using right now to stop, again, the terror campaign that Trump is on. But the majority of the Republicans won't agree, won't enforce those principles and statutes and precedents, right? In terms of legal value, nothing. The dissent has no legal importance. The reason why people spend a lot of time writing them, and the reason why they're so important, is that they are what future generations will look for. They are what when these cases eventually get overturned, people will point to these dissents and say, like, actually, it's the dissent that was right. The majority got it wrong, but there's already a record for how we should have interpreted this law or that law. Republicans, they love to point out the one dissenter in Plessy v. Ferguson, right? The one dissenter who said that separate but equal wasn't equal. Republicans quote that guy all the time. Like, see, not all of us white people were wrong. There was one guy, right? So, like, that dissent has, like, stood the test of time. There are others. But that's why Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan write them. They also do a thing, and I think that in this moment it's critically important. They give the media talking points for how to understand these Republican rulings and attack it on a different scale, right? A lot of people, they don't have legal training, that they haven't been following the cases closely, but when Jackson or Sotomayor or Kagan writes a really clear or really strongly worded dissent, it alerts everybody else, all the non-legal media, that hey, something is rotten here. Something is. At one point, Sotomayor called it the stench of the Supreme Court. The stench is pretty pungent here, and the dissents sometimes alert the larger media to the fact that what the majority is doing, what the Republicans are doing, is not something legally that they should be allowed to do.
Absolutely. Well, before we go to Mustafa and Larry, I want to ask you one final question. And I'm glad you brought up the media because a lot of times people will read the headline or hear the headline and not realize that the merits, the underlying merits of the case, this isn't what they're deciding at this point, right? So when Sonia Sotomayor opens her dissent by saying in matters of life and death, it is best to proceed with caution, she's talking about the process, right? She's not talking about the underlying issues. And I wonder if you could help everyone watching understand that this case has not been decided on its merits. This is about what rights these folks have to actually be heard, and they're allowing them to be deported. Could you just spend a second maybe helping everybody understand the distinction between a ruling on the merits and one that's dealing with the process?
Yeah, so the best way to understand it is that the law is super complicated, right? And it's very rare that you get to this kind of yes, no, up, down question on was something legal, was something illegal. Courts, I would say, sometimes go out of their way to avoid answering that question and instead answer the question, was this done in a legal manner? Was the process we used here correct? Because if the process we used here was correct, then a lot of times we don't even have to get to the question of whether or not the underlying thing was correct, right? Like that's the kind of lawyer's way of wiggling out of some morally and ethically challenging decisions. The way that the Republicans use these procedural rules, however, is, again, critically important and I would argue devious, right? Because they understand that on the merits, on the actual moral, ethical quandaries that we're talking about, Trump is wrong. Trump is wrong about the Constitution. He's wrong about the statutes. And again, he's wrong about the United States' international treaties. He's just legally wrong. But by making it a procedural ruling, saying basically, well, he was wrong, but he followed the right process to be wrong, what it does is that it allows him to continue to do illegal, unconstitutional things without the court either weighing in to stop him, but also without the court saying like, oh, we support the illegal, unconstitutional thing, right? Because they couldn't get away with that. At some level, they couldn't intellectually get away with saying, yeah, this treaty that we've had for 30 years, it just doesn't matter anymore. The courts can't do that. But what they can do is say, oh, well, the president is interpreting the treaty right now, and we can't stop the president from interpreting treaties, so go on with your bad self, right? So it lets them allow Trump to get what he wants without having to endorse what Trump is doing. And it's a very thin slice of the salami, right? It's a very, I would say, intellectually dishonest game that the Republicans on the Supreme Court are playing. And that is the other point of the dissent. That's what Sotomayor was spent a lot of time in her 19 pages calling out the majority for doing.
No question, no question. Appreciate you, brother. In fact, let's open it up and let's bring in the rest of our folks tonight. And I'm gonna ask Dr. Ali to start. Brother Mustafa, any questions, comments, engagement here with our good brother Eli Mustafa?
Well, Eli, it's always good to see you. Thank you for everything you continue to do. It's also interesting how the Supreme Court brought this case forward. You might want to talk a little bit about emergency dockets and how things that have been lingering out there often get pulled forward.
Oh, yeah. So most of the Supreme Court versus Trump issue is on what's called the emergency or shadow docket, right? And there's a very good reason for that. Trump moves fast. The executive moves fast. Presidents move fast. Courts generally move very slowly, right? And so when Trump is kind of on the precipice, on the cusp of doing something horribly illegal, horribly unconstitutional, and as Sotomayor put it, truly matters of life or death, people need to not forget the plaintiffs in this case who were arguing for their rights, they've already been sent to Djibouti. They are trying to litigate their rights from Djibouti, with Trump trying to send them to South Sudan, where they will likely be tortured if Trump, now that Trump has succeeded, right? So the emergency docket is a way for the Supreme Court to kind of quickly hear matters of life or death. We see it all the time before Trump. We saw it all the time in death penalty cases, issues where, absent a court ruling, it is likely that somebody is going to die. Now, what the court does, however, is that, and we saw this, we can see the difference between Trump and Biden. When Trump wants to do something unconstitutional or illegal, the court will do what I said, lift the injunction, make a procedural ruling on the emergency docket, and say, oh, sometime later we'll get to the merits someday in the future. Torture all the prisoners you want, torture all the immigrants you want. We'll get to it eventually. When Biden tried to do something that the court thought was unconstitutional or illegal, boom, like that, emergency docket, let's go. Biden, you can't do it. Student loans, get that out of here, right? So the court literally acted with more alacrity, with more quickness, with more speed when it came to preventing Biden from providing student debt relief than it is when it comes to preventing Trump from sending immigrants off to be tortured.
Thank you, Mustafa, for asking that question. I feel like we're getting a whole law school segment in 10 minutes here, which is excellent. That's why there's a Black Star Network. So that is excellent. Dr. Walker, Brother Larry, anything for our brother Ellie?
Yeah, sure. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of leaving people nationless. And you touched on that a little bit. And I guess for me, the bigger question is what's happening to these individuals wherever they're sent to countries that are not where they were born. And like I said, this idea of being nationless, what are the long-term implications when it comes to being, we look at the UN and policies and procedures relating to individuals in terms of humanitarian aid, support, recognition of individual from different nations, and the importance of treating each person like a human being. What does this mean for you think long-term in terms of the United States is essentially kind of be, seen as this kind of bastion of what democracy and fairness is supposed to be, but this is the complete opposite of that, and what that means for countries in the future in terms of how they treat individuals that essentially are nationless?
Well, that's a really good question, and I've got two sides of an answer to that. First of all, we are a rogue nation right now, and I feel like most Americans, most Black Americans, kind of have always understood that. And now perhaps white Americans are catching up to the fact that we're the bad guys. We're the menace on the world stage. You don't just have to look at what we're doing to Iran. You can look right now with this court case that, again, it is a violation of an international treaty that we've signed on to for 30 years. This is a human rights violation that we are now a party to as a nation. We are a failed rogue state that is a bad guy on the international stage. And other states that want to be bad guys now can look to us for cover, can now look to us and be like, oh, look how America treats its prisoners. We can do the same thing. Look how America treats its undocumented immigrants. We can do the same torturous, horrible things. And again, for Black people, that has always been the case. I mean, other countries have always said, look at how America treats its Black people, and now they want to lecture to us about morality. Like, other countries have always known that. We're making it extremely obvious right now during the Trump administration. So that's one side of the answer. The other side is a thing that, I don't know that a lot of people knew that we did to immigrants before Trump, but we did this to immigrants before Trump. The idea that somebody comes here, right? Let's say it's in violation of our laws. I'm not going to get into a whole debate about what our immigration laws should be. I think most of them are dumb, but whatever, in violation of our laws, all right? Now, the immigrant says, well, you can't send me back to my home country because if you send me back there, I will be killed. That is why I fled there in the first place. I was fleeing terror and violence. And the immigrant's claim is so good, is so reasonable, is so provable, that the immigrant gets a judge to agree, an actual federal judge to agree, hey, guess what? We can't send them back. They'll be tortured and killed. And so that our government, and not just Trump's government, Biden's government, Obama's government, Bush's government, Our government says, all right, well, we can't send you back to your home country because this judge says you'll be tortured. So we're going to send you somewhere else. Somewhere that you're not from, you don't speak the language, you ain't got no family. We're not going to let you stay here, which is where you came to. We're not going to let you stay here where you have violated our laws. So the rational play would be for you to be punished here, since we're the country that we're saying you violate our. But no. We're going to send you to a random ass nation to be punished. Trump has added into the mix a random ass torturous nation, right? A random ass, El Salvador has developed an entire revenue stream around imprisoning and torturing illegal immigrants. That's part of their GDP now, right? And South Sudan is not far behind. So it's like when America has too much garbage and we try to find another country that's going to take our garbage. Instead of dealing with it ourselves, we pay somebody else, because that's what America does, to take our garbage, right? You can imagine the kind of countries that are willing to take our excess immigration problems. They're not, the leaders in human rights around the world, right? We're not sending people to like the south of France because the French are so much more evolved than we are. That's not what's happening, right? We're sending people to countries in political or economic turmoil who need the money and are not going to treat our detritus particularly well.
Yes.
And that's what's happening, right? And that's what people need. That's where I think some of the moral outrage has to come from what we're doing. If this person has established that they can't be sent back home because they're in too much danger, why can't they stay here? And fine, stay here in jail, stay here in whatever stupid thing that we're going to do. But why can't they stay here, where at least we can guarantee, one would hope, some access to civil and humanitarian rights?
Okay. So before we take our first break of the evening, I want to ask Nyambi to come back around if she has anything if you have anything, Doctor, you want to ask our brother before we go to break. And of course, just as we were going on air, we got news out of New York that the federal courts have told the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Jordan Melgar Samaran. Samaran, of course, exactly what you just said, Ellie, is saying that, hey, listen, if you send me to El Salvador, I could really get jammed up. So the federal courts, at least the lower level in New York, have just said he's, of course, joining Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, who was returned recently. So, Nyambi, anything for Ellie?
Well, hey, Allie, it's been a while. Good to see you. So you were talking a bit about the Convention of Torture, and that's basically out the window. And so now we're becoming a model for all the wrong reasons. But you started talking about this loophole, right? That the Supreme Court has essentially said, yes, Trump can exercise. But what do we think about this? Or how do we think about this, especially in a legal framework where this does become potentially a revenue stream for other nations that essentially can have these other people to do whatever they wish to do with them? How do we talk about this?
I mean, you're talking about basically the plot of like 15 different dystopian sci-fi novels, right? Where you have an entire economy based on imprisoning people. But we also know that entire economy doesn't just exist in these other places. They don't just exist in El Salvador and Sudan. We know that we have our own private prison complex that's $1 billion industry that profits on the enslavement, because let's always remember the 13th Amendment applied to everybody except prisoners, right? The amendment that ended slavery applied to everybody except prisoners, right? And we already know we have $1 billion industry based on the forced labor of our incarcerated folks, right? And they do everything from, the standard kind of apocryphal making license plates to picking our food, to stocking our shelves, right? These are workers in our economy that are unpaid, that are treated as slave labor because they are incarcerated. So my first answer to that question is that we could start at home. We could start by not supporting the private prison complex, by passing laws that ended the enslavement of our incarcerated Americans. Like that would be a good start, but it's difficult to get people to think about prisoners as humans. Especially difficult to get white people to think about prisoners as humans. So like that's one avenue where we could reform. Another thing I always want to throw this out there because I think it's critically important. When you are a lawyer and your job is to find a loophole in an international human rights treaty, that's a pretty good indication that you're working for the bad guys. Right? Like that's the bat signal of I work for bad people if they're asking me to find a damn loophole in an international human rights treaty, right? And there's got to be some level of public shaming and disgust for these people, right? John Sauer, the Solicitor General, who is credited with finding the loophole in this particular case, there's no reason why this man should be able to go to a cocktail party in D.C. and not get booed out of the bar, not get booed out of the brunch spot, right? Like these are bad people who are doing bad things and then don't get treated like bad people, not only in their current job, but like when they wash out of government and they go back into private practice, private lobbying, whatever, they get to resume their lives as if they hadn't just spent 4 years finding new and interesting ways to torture people. Like that also shouldn't be a thing. Right. So I am all for actual reforms. I'm all for starting at home and reforming our prison industrial complex. But I'm also for shaming. And I'm not Luigi. I'm nonviolently and all that. But I'm all for shaming the people who spend their 9 to 5 trying to figure out how to hurt people more efficiently.
Thanks, Niambi, and thank you, Ellie, for at last minute jumping in for us. Ellie Mistal, of course, correspondent for The Nation, author of Allow Me to Retort, and the most recent book, of course, released 3 months ago, the best-selling Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Brother, we're going to have to schedule a session at the Black Table. Maybe we can get our friend Martha Jones and y'all can walk us through whether there is truly a constitutional threat to birthright citizenship. A lot of people are blowing it off, but I know you are taking that very seriously. Thank you, brother. Thank you for joining us here again, Roland Martin Unfiltered, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.